Hi everyone, Paul Elam here with an ear for men. About 2 weeks ago, Prager University placed a video on YouTube titled, "Be a Man, Get Married." As it turned out, the effort was a book you could judge by its cover. The presenter, Brad Wilcox, a sociologist at the University of Virginia, dished up a remarkably shaming diatribe targeting young men who are opting out of marriage and going their own way. His derisive approach to young men was laced with nice graphics and statistics about how much better off they would be if married. It more resembled an attack than anything else, painting young men who won't marry as basement-dwelling losers who won't amount to much in life, at least by his standards. Predictably, it got a hostile reaction from some advocates of MGTOW philosophy who made some solid response videos that apparently took Wilcox by surprise. So taken aback was he that he wrote an article about it that first appeared at the Institute for Family Studies, then later at the Federalist in a much more sensational and shaming presentation. From watching the video a couple of times and reading his article, a couple of things become clear to me about Wilcox. 1. He believes that stable family units are an essential component of a civilized society. And 2, he also believes that we are a culture in trouble in that regard. I couldn't possibly agree more. Stable, intact nuclear families have long been the foundation for whatever peace, prosperity, and advancement our society has enjoyed. We can easily see the results of those families being undermined in our prison system or in our streets in the form of gangs, in teen pregnancy, substance abuse, truancy, and delinquency. All these problems, and many more, increase in severity as we tear into the fabric of the family. I suspect that Mr. Wilcox is more aware of this than the average person, and he appears to be trying to do something about it by messaging young men. That, or he is just posturing for the sanctimonious brotherhood at PragerU as the lot of them watch the use-by date of their belief system fade ever further into history. Either way, this is where the problems start. If your goal is to convince young men to take on the responsibility of marriage and family, shame is not the instrument of choice I would select to move that along. As Wilcox may have learned by now, the man-up ploy is an ever more reliable backfire in a culture of men growing savvy to manipulation tactics and shop-worn ideas. On the outside chance that Wilcox is watching this, and on the even more remote possibility that his concern for the fabric of our society isn't crushed beneath the weight of his own piousness and groupthink, I have a suggestion on how he might react to the anger he got over that shameful video. Rather than attempt to humiliate these men for the way they feel, and for the rejection of traditional mandates, it's wiser, I think, to understand where all that comes from. The blanket assumption that these young men are driven by misogyny will not help with that understanding, unless your objective is putting on a defiant show as your worldview circles the drain, taking the families you supposedly cherish with it. It has been mentioned in the videos and the article and the comments that followed them that fear of divorce, and more specifically family courts, was part of what drives the narrative for these men. There is more to it than that. Consider how many young men in this country today spent formative years with their fathers in exile from the family. Consider how many of them watched their dads push from the family home into studio apartments, living in poverty, sometimes ending with them living in their cars, and even worse. There are countless young men today who were raised by single, alienating mothers who constantly badmouthed their fathers. They were never really given the opportunity to hear the other side of the story. They grow up feeling abandoned, angry, and unable to talk about it because it will mean rejection by the only parent they have. Marriage, for so many of the young men Wilcox is judging, has already been a catastrophe, and they've never even been married. Wilcox isn't aware that when he says man up, all they hear is bend over. Now, is there misogyny within this population of men? Well, ostensibly, yes. There's some on the fringes, and I have pointed to it in the past with similar results that Mr. Wilcox received. People got angry at me for saying something. The difference between he and I, though, is that I was far from surprised by the reaction. One, I understand that misogynists are made, not born. In our natural state, men tend to love women and want to take care of them. The greatest majority of men who reject that part of themselves and set sights on the social exit ramp do so after being provided abundantly good reason. Indeed, most men don't go their own way till they realize there is no other sane choice. One of the overarching reasons that sends them packing and foments more than a little resentment is the trivializing of their experience and reacting to it with incredulity. If you want to reach younger men, starting by calling them whiners and liars is a pretty stupid way to start. This kind of approach, though, frequently comes from men of Wilcox' ilk, and it only sends his intended targets out further and faster. If we want our society to reduce misogyny, then we need to quit putting men, by hook or crook, so savagely at the mercy of women. It would also not hurt to dispense with the practice of insisting they volunteer for that or face even more betrayal by their elders. Brad Wilcox has just epitomized this problem, placing young men in front of a minefield and trying to shame them into walking in without even acknowledging that the mines are there. It's like he's saying, "Mines? What mines?" And he is talking to a lot of men who have already had their legs blown off. These men are indeed angry, often hostile, but they're not stupid. The PragerU video did nothing but galvanize those it was attempting to shame and coerce. Call me an idealist if you like, but I still have hope for part of this situation, just as I do for the future of men and women. And I think that hope is necessary. When the fundamental relationship between men and women fails, families fail, and with that, society. I share Wilcox's belief in the importance of family and with the agenda to restore it in some fashion. He just doesn't have his finger solidly on the cultural pulse, perhaps because his thumb is somewhere else. Men going their own way didn't happen in a vacuum. It is a necessary, intelligent reaction to some very toxic social maladies that affect men. And while we're discussing intelligence, having enough to not double down on the attempts to humiliate them would show some of that. The way the Federalist crafted that headline was a huge step in the wrong direction, especially if the restoration of the family is the real concern. Most men, enough to maintain a stable society anyway, will want to get married and create families. But the system is broken. The family courts are biased against men and corrupt. Our culture and law indulges and enables women to the point of making them dangerous to their husbands and even to their own children. Telling young men that if they don't walk into that with blinders on, that they're not real men, isn't just shaming. It is incalculably bad advice from people who practice aggressive, willful ignorance about the world in which they live. If you want more men to marry and have families, then do some serious risk reduction on their behalf. Give them certainty that if their marriage ends, they will still have full access to their children. Eliminate alimony and accept in very rare cases child support. Make shared parenting the default for family courts. Take the financial incentive away from lawyers to destroy families. Evict the feminist influence in our family courts that comes from domestic violence advocates and social workers. Give men the legal right to confirm paternity at any time and do not hold them responsible for children they did not father. Give men assurances that they won't lose their property or face poverty just because she is no longer happy. Give them a realistic and safe legal standard of marriage and watch the tides begin to change. There's another aspect of this, one that Wilcox lightly touched on when he mentioned that married men live longer than single men. It's a message that bachelorhood is akin to cancer or some other terminal disease. Trust me, these men have heard the line before that married men live longer.
I always hear women say, married men live longer. Yes, and an indoor cat also lives longer. It's a furball with a broken spirit that can only look out on a world it will never enjoy, but it does technically live longer.
Divorce and family court aren't the only things that men are avoiding. A life sentence with what amounts to a state-sanctioned whore isn't a happy alternative to divorce. It may, in fact, be worse. Oh, and I'm not calling all women whores, just pointing to the indisputable fact that our society provides a lot of women incentive to become whores. One has to wonder just how many women in the modern world do men like Wilcox and Prager imagine exist, who will be faithful, loyal partners to their husbands, actually taking on the full responsibility of caring for husband and children for a lifetime. I'm talking about women who always put their family and their marriage first and who don't work on turning their provider husbands into ATMs, who don't decide 10 years in that they need to rip it all to shreds to go find themselves at everyone else's expense. How many men marry, devote everything to their marriages, only to be condemned to a life void of purpose and joy? Marriage that actually rewarded men was 2 generations ago, if it ever really existed. At any rate, except for rare exceptions, women worth marrying don't exist anymore. And men don't get to find out what a woman is really made of till they're locked in and at the mercy of the state whenever she decides it's time. Wilcox is not telling men to man up. He is telling them to be clueless marks in a carnival sideshow. That is why the marriage strike is expanding. That is why it won't stop. Because so far the mainstream in our culture can't come up with anything that will motivate men to park on train tracks and take a nap. If Prager and company want to fix this stuff, it is they who need to man up and start addressing the real problems. 2 things are needed to end the marriage strike. Sweeping legal reform that takes men out of the crosshairs, and a similarly massive social upheaval that confronts and destroys the toxic sense of entitlement in women that has mutated into the cultural personality disorder that PragerU is enabling. There's your family enhancement plan, and good luck with that shit. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but the obvious place to start is to challenge PragerU, the Federalists, the Institute for Family Studies, our churches, and countless other institutions to lift the veil of denial from in front of their eyes and start acting on the real problems, which are not that young men are bums and haters. It is not young men who are failing and jeopardizing the family unit. It is the system and society that is failing them. Young men are just practicing the unconscious wisdom of the times. The family is the absolute worst of modern battlefields, a place where men are routinely forced to fight with no weapons and no support against an enemy with unlimited resources and no honor. They never asked for that. They never wanted it. And now people like Dennis Prager and Brad Wilcox are blaming them for wisely choosing to resist. As you might imagine, it's not working. Finally, guys, I leave you with your Thursday tip of the week. In keeping with the spirit of this presentation, just say no to marriage. No matter how wonderful, how perfect you imagine your girlfriend to be, the overall odds say it won't last, and once that happens, you can be in big trouble. You see, once you're legally married, you are officially property of the state, and so are your children, by the way. When she becomes bored or displeased, or when she simply wants to start banging the pool boy, the state will put its full force at her disposal to ruin you. For more on that, please see my video, Men, Math, and Marriage, in the low bar. I also wanted to leave a special thanks to those of you who have made pledges to the Ear for Men Patreon page. And a heads up, Peter Wright's fantastic book, Gynocentrism, From Feudalism to the Modern Disney Princess, is now available to all Patreon subscribers free of charge. Also available is the first in a series of discussions between Peter and I on gynocentrism in the modern age on MP3. There are more of those to come, all available only to Patreon subscribers. Please give us a like, a share, and a sub, and the link to our Patreon page is in the low bar. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.